Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Atheist Uprising. I'm your host, Josh the Archon, and today we're going to have a fantastic discussion. We're going to delve into Darwin and natural selection. But before we do that, I really just want to thank everybody within our Patreon. Thank you so much, Linear, TART, and Dion LaShay for really helping us do what we love to do, which is create content for you, the viewer. So thank you so much. The next thing that I really want to do and delve into is thank everybody that's in the comment section right now. Thank you for coming up and showing and just helping support us. So that really does, I really do appreciate that. So thank you very much. Now, let us begin. But before, actually, one more thing. Before we do, I created a whole slideshow for this, but I'm unable to do it at the moment. So it's perfectly fine. I'll utilize the slideshow for myself in order to keep this ball rolling. So let us begin. Natural selection, and let alone Darwin's insight on natural selection. What are we going to delve into? What is natural selection in and of itself? This is a very good question, but before we do that, I want to actually go a bit further before natural selection, before Darwin's insight into evolution by natural selection. So let's begin. The first thing that I wanted to bring up was the transition between supernatural explanation and let alone the methodological naturalistic explanation. So this is the thing that we're going to discuss. We understand when we look at human history, and definitely when we look at human prehistory to history that we're living in right now, the historic era of humanity, what we actually see is the majority of time we've always been curious about where we came from. How did we get here? What was the purpose behind us being here in the first place? These questions that sometimes keep individuals up, and definitely philosophers up, and certain scientists up, even at night, wondering why we're here in the first place. And from there, individuals, and definitely individuals from the prehistoric era, we're looking back literally sometimes 65,000 years ago, where we actually see what is called the Venus models in a sense. So there were these figurines that look like women in particular, and certain individuals have different ideas into what these figurines were in particular. Certain people think that these were meant for fertility reasons. So this was the goddess of fertility. Other individuals believe that this was the goddess of, again, or actually predominantly just the goddess of fertility. There have been other ideas, but as of now, we're not particularly sure what the main reason of these goddesses are, right? However, over time, because that was the one thing, it was extremely difficult for humanity to think outside the box, think on a methodological, naturalistic ideas, or utilize methodological naturalistic explanations. Because in the very beginning, while you are struggling through life in a sense as hunter-gatherers, it is extremely difficult to try to take yourself out of that realm and think beyond the box that you're living in, right? So for certain individuals, and for these individuals in particular, hunter-gatherers, what we see, or prehistoric peoples, is that what we see is the creation of myths in order to answer these questions. Well, how did we come here? Well, this was by the gods themselves. The gods willed us into being. And from there, or the spirits willed us into being. Because remember, before any type of gods were ever introduced into our idea, into our conception, right? There were spirits beforehand, and the belief in spirits was something that was extremely powerful on the human psyche itself. And hence where we see animism come from. And a lot of people in particular think that animism was the very first belief system that human beings actually had. And from there, it mutated into a plethora of other belief systems, which then amalgamated into polytheism, and from there into monotheism, where we're at today. However, because of the spiritualistic belief systems that human beings had in their past, it helped answer certain questions. That the spirits brought us here, that the spirits were the very thing that created all things on Earth, including the Earth itself. Now, let's fast forward a bit into the more, let's just say, archaic, or maybe not archaic, but let's just say the fall of the Mycenaean Empire, right? Or the Mycenaean civilization in and of itself. When the Mycenaean Empire fell, one thing that ended up happening was that it sparked a whole new way of thinking within the populations in Hellas, or what is also called what we now know as Greece, right? So slowly but surely, the ideas that we're actually formulating within Hellas, within these city-states of Greece, for instance, slowly started to emanate away from the very ideas which we conceptualized in the first place, which was everything had a divine meaning, right? How are you doing, Titan? Welcome to the show. So yes, the idea was that the ancient Greeks, starting from the archaic period into the classical period, started to push away, certain Greek philosophers started to push away from divination and try to ask questions based on the natural. How do we get here naturally, right? And one really big Greek philosopher during the archaic and classical periods, we could kind of look at that, named Empedocles, right? He himself believed that limbs in and of themselves, so like your eyes, your head, your arms, and everything like that, actually either came into existence from the ground in and of itself or from other means independently from body, right? So all things were separated in and of themselves and amalgamated slowly but surely while wandering the world, in a sense, came together, and once they were in close proximity and created. Oh, from the ground, what do you mean? Well, predominantly, it's very hard to understand where Empedocles really thought of his idea, because he doesn't really delve into the idea that much. But what he predominantly thinks, or what we can take away from that, is that either, just like how grass comes from the actual soil, right, of the earth, that Empedocles might have thought that different, like, arms, legs, and everything like that also appeared from the ground as well, through natural causes of some sort. We're not particularly sure where he was going within this thought process, but we can see that he was trying to understand the naturalistic world without divination. And from there, the one thing is that a lot of people would look at Empedocles and say, well, he was absolutely wrong, and obviously he was, but we can't necessarily look at his explanation as tomfoolery during his time, because the reality of the situation is that he used the best what was available to him at that time and created a hypothesis based on these type of thought processes, based on these type of explanations. And hence, what he also believed was that once these pieces amalgamated together into an actual being, what ended up happening is that sometimes there can be mistakes, like individuals that had two faces, or individuals that had, or you would have animals with human heads, or vice versa, things with human bodies with animal heads, right? And these type of monstrosities also walked with human beings during this time. That's what he believed, right? And from these amalgamated body parts, once these beings reproduce with each other, they would actually keep that. Obviously he didn't know about genetics at that time, but they would look like that amalgamated body that was there. So henceforth they were able to make, to him at least, copies of themselves once they came together into that form. So it's very interesting to really delve into how certain ancient philosophers try to use the naturalistic explanation in order to understand where we got to, or how we came here at this particular time period. So I find that very interesting in and of itself. And obviously, there's been other philosophers who have done very well with hypotheses, for instance, but they didn't necessarily delve into testing the hypothesis, right? So let's just look at Aristotle, for instance. Aristotle believed that men had more teeth in their mouth than women did. Now, there can be plethora of explanation why that can happen, or why he thought these type of in this way. One explanation is that he did not test his theory. He did not test his hypotheses. Even though that he had two wives, he just thought that he was correct based on his assumptions, based on his postulates. However, I think that maybe he might have actually tested his hypothesis, maybe, but yet he kind of found maybe his wives to be the exception to the rule. And henceforth, if he did test his hypothesis, saw that his wives had as many teeth as he had within his mouth, he might have believed that maybe this is something that that is just an isolated case, and most women actually have less teeth within their mouths than men. However, there's a tug of war based on this. What is the real explanation behind this? Did he actually test his hypothesis, or did he just state his hypothesis without testing them at all? Right? And that's one of the things that, or why we look at Hellas, for instance, or Greece, to be the founders of the methodological naturalistic method, in a sense, or maybe not method, but way of looking at the world through a naturalistic lens, right? Though, just like how I stated, they might have definitely failed in certain instances based on testing their set hypothesis. Now, let's delve into something a little more recent, and that is more, how about methodological naturalism? Why do we utilize that in order to understand the world around us, right? So one very thing is that methodological naturalism really does help us with the scientific method, because it helps us formulate our ideas through the scientific method of what we're trying to explain, what we're trying to observe, or what we are observing in the first place, what our hypotheses are, and should we change the hypothesis based on our methodological naturalistic understanding of things, or what we see before our very eyes. One second, let me just delve in here. So what ended up happening, right, was that through methodological naturalism, or actually before I delve into that, let's just delve into the definition. So the reason why we use the adjective methodological is because it provides a method or a procedure for seeking scientific explanation of the world, right? So we utilize this methodology in order to help us understand the world of which we live in through the scientific endeavor. However, we also use the word naturalism because what we are focusing on is the naturalistic world rather than the supernatural, because it is extremely hard, or certain individuals believe that it is nigh impossible to actually test out any hypotheses of the supernatural. However, I come from the school of thought where everything that people think that is supernatural is just things that we're not sure of yet. So they are part of the naturalistic world. It's just that we're not particularly sure of how these things actually work, how they function. And henceforth, we call that supernatural because of our ignorance, or maybe because of our not knowing how, as I keep saying, that particular thing works. However, there are certain people who are on the opposite side of me and state that no, there are certain things that if they were supernatural, there would be no way to test out what is supernatural. So we have those two school of thoughts. But the one thing that we really want to show, though, and the whole entire point of this conversation wasn't necessarily to delve into methodological naturalism, but I wanted to build a foundation of how we came to Darwinian thought process, and let alone natural selection. So let us delve into it. The very first thing, and what we really want to delve into and really want to look at, was that what were the ideas that Darwin borrowed from in the first place? Because just like every other person that's out there, they borrow ideas, or just like the statement states, borrowing ideas, or we stand on the shoulders of giants before us, right? And from there, we start to see where Darwin got his ideas from natural selection, built up on them, and let alone through his observations while he was going through the archipelagos. What he ended up seeing or observing, which validated, or what he believed validated, his theory of evolution through natural selection. So let's jump into it. So the first thing is we must look at LaShay. I believe that is his name. I could be getting his name incorrect, but it is something that is such as LaShay. And what he was a geologist. So what he started to look at was the different environmental changes within different environments, and how different environments have some sort of interaction with species in and of themselves. So even though that he was looking at things through a geological lens, we can see that through that geological lens, it really helped Darwin formulate the very essence of his idea of evolution through natural selection. The other thing too was based on Paley, and let alone more, we can focus more on Lamarck after, or Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, but we'll focus a little more on Paley right now, based on his ideas and understanding, based on the perfection of, let's just say, the body, and how the body in and of itself was divinely created, and not just human bodies, but all bodies from animals to human beings. And one thing that was very interesting was that Paley looked at animals as being very, how could I say it? They were adapted to their environment extremely well. And why was that? And for him, he believed that that was through divination, that God in and of himself gave animals, based on their said distinction, right? Based on their said kind, and let alone human beings as well, based on their said kind, the ability to adapt to said environment, right? And that was something that was very strong with, hold on, just to be clear, are you saying divine? No, not divine nation, divine nation. It's yeah. So with that in and of itself, my apologies. With that in and of itself, what divine nation? Oh, it's true. I am putting an A on it, emphasizing an A. No, I'm not trying to say divine nation. Is divine? Ah, now I'm getting all messed up. But anyways, what it means is that it was divinely inspired by God to give these particular animals. Yes, yes. Thank you, Titan. Yes, that's well. Hold on, divine divination. There you go. Thank you. Thank you. So through that, it allowed, right, that God allowed animals to adapt, or not even adapt, but gave every animal that specific, or any kind of animal, an environment that it was already adapted to. Now, Lamarck actually thought of it differently. Lamarck looked at it and stated, no, these are transitional forms. Like, let's just say with a draft, this is the easiest way of looking at Lamarckian theory, is that a giraffe, let's just say, that was shorter than a tree, that it was trying to get its sustenance from, would slowly but surely through the generations have a longer neck because of its parent stretching out its neck, right, trying to reach that sense of sustenance, or not sense, but try to reach the sustenance which is on that tree. What slowly but surely ends up happening is that over the time period, what we would see is that the giraffe's offspring would also have a longer neck, and a longer neck based on the strains of trying to reach those leaves from that tree. And from there, we could see through slow but surely, or not slow but surely, but through this trying to transition, which led to, let's just say, giraffes in and of themselves being able to reach up into higher trees and so on and so forth. Now, that's when Darwin seems to have come in, along with William. They came in and looked at this idea, and at first, oh, 1 second, let me just check this out. Pretty sure the longer necks of the animals just made them better at surviving and spreading their genes. Nothing to do with somehow having your kids have a stretched neck just because you stretch. You're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct. But that's the thing, though, was that Lamarck was trying to think outside of the box, where he looked at what Pele was stating and he didn't necessarily agree with Pele. And he thought that maybe, right, that the animal goes through transitional phases because their parents in the first place were trying to actually reach something, or maybe not just reach, but also go through that transitional phase, let's just say, in order to adapt to their environments in particular ways, right? Even though that is very difficult, and Darwin actually showed why Lamarck's way of thinking was not the right way of looking at how evolution happens. But again, Lamarck really tried to think outside the box. Hold on, let me look at this. Wasn't there something in the Bible about letting cows mate near a striped pole and the calves would have stripes? That I am not sure. I am not sure about that. Maybe there is something in there. I'll need to read up on that particular scripture and see if that was the case. Lamarck, yes, Lamarck did have a vivid imagination. I would agree, but at least he was a bit more down to earth than Empedocles, who believed that arms, legs, heads, and eyes were all separated and kind of appeared on this earth independently, and then came together and amalgamated into creatures and human beings and so on and so forth, and let alone animals and stuff like that. So I would say that Lamarck is a bit more down to earth, and I would think he's a lot better in explaining his ideas rather than Empedocles was. Even though that I can't look at Empedocles and say that Empedocles in and of himself was wrong of thinking, or was wrong for thinking these type of things during his time, right? because he was only going through, as I stated beforehand, the knowledge that he had. Exactly. Genesis. Oh, okay, perfect. Thank you, Titan. I'll definitely look at that. And if it is in Genesis, then yes, then it is stated in the Bible. And henceforth, we can even see that people who believed in the Bible didn't really take that verse into account when they were thinking about evolution before natural selection, or evolution in a particular way before Darwin came up with his theory of natural selection. So, yes. So, anyways, when Darwin came into, or not came into being, what the hell? When Darwin was born and stuff like that, and was looking at these other particular ways of how individuals were looking at not natural selection, but evolution in and of itself, he thought to himself, well, there's a problem. There seems to be a problem here, because while we are looking, and let alone, he utilized, right, or one of the biggest pastime activities, which was, oh my God, what the hell are they called again? Not seagulls. My God, pigeons. Because back in Victorian England, what was the particular thing that a lot of the aristocracy would do is they would capture a pigeon, and through, just like last show when I was talking about artificial selection, they would look at a particular thing that they wanted to not augment, but a trait that they wanted to accentuate, right? And through that accentuation of that trait, they would look at the particular offspring of that pigeon. And let's just say, looking at white wings, for instance, they would, or wanting a pigeon that was much more whiter than the original pigeon, they would take out the lightest offspring of that pigeon, put it into isolation, and have it mate with other pigeons, or procreate with other pigeons. And from there, through that slow and steady generation after generation, created, or not created, but you would have a trait of a whiter pigeon, right? And from there, that's where Darwin kind of thought about the idea and said, well, that can't necessarily be Lamarckian in thought process, because the one very thing is that when we are looking at, because, oh, before I continue, Lamarck thought of things in generational terms. So every offspring could grow its neck longer and longer because of that original parent trying to reach for the vegetation that's up in the tree. Now, with Darwin, he looked at that and stated, look, I don't see that aspect. When we look at giraffes and everything like that, or when we look at particular animals, they're not adapting extremely quick over a transitional phase of just generation after generation. What they're actually doing, and that's what he thought of a long time evolution, or his evolutionary theory based on it having to utilize a longer duration of time for a particular trait, or for a particular variation of that particular animal to come into being in the first place, right? And also, he looked at it as a way of seeing that we need a longer transitional period. And that was the very thing that Darwin first contemplated within his ideas, or within his theory of natural selection, was that the environments in and of themselves are the very thing that is that are the selective agents on what variance in a trait that an organism may have, right? Because all it's trying to look for is things that can survive, or not. The environment doesn't necessarily pick or select. What ends up happening is that those that don't adapt to their environment die, right? So let's just say, if you have a peppered moth and a more whiter moth, right? But you have, let's just say, a tree that's in front of you, and birds who like to eat moths, let's just say, come in and are eating those said moths. Then the variance, right, over a long duration of time will benefit those moths because they haven't been eaten that are more the color of the tree, more peppered like, let's just say, than the more whiter moths. And from that very instances, what we can see is that the individuals who are able to adapt to their environment are able to live much longer, procreate, and not only that, but well, which is also equated to living much longer, they are able to survive, right? And through their survival, based on their adaptation of the environment, it helps them to ward off predators, right? Or to survive predators and to carry off their offspring. So that's one huge aspect that Lamarck never even thought of, was this slow variation over time due to certain animals or certain animals dying from their environment and other ones surviving in their environment because they were harder to for predators to catch and to feed upon than the ones that did not adapt to their environment. So it's extremely interesting to see that particular thought process that Darwin came up with. Now, the other thing that Darwin looked at was based on common ancestry, that natural selection in and of itself, through its long duration of time, equated to animals being more uh, closely connected than ever thought before. And Darwin would have thought too that there was either an originating, let's just say, thing that was out there that all other animals came from, and something that was natural, not anything that was supernatural, but like something that was single. Well, he didn't think of single cells at that time, but I mean, now talking to you, he would have, if he would have known what cells were, he would have actually um, jumped on that big time and would have said, well, there was an originating cell that then throughout time ended up creating the plethora of life that we see on Earth today, right? But because he didn't have that knowledge, science didn't advance towards that state as of yet, it was extremely difficult for Darwin to really open up what Pandora's box he opened. So he could only kind of like delve into the certain mechanisms that he was able to really observe. But because there was so much more that he did not know, what his theory was actually opening up to not only the general population, but to science in and of itself, all he had was, as I stated, his own observations. So from that very instances, when he was coming up with a common ancestor, he was predominantly thinking of another animal, in a sense, that was a generator of all other life forms that we see on Earth or whatever. And if he would have known the Tiktaalik, for instance, which was not recently found, but found within the 2000s or 1999, I forget exactly when the Tiktaalik was found, or not found, but I mean, was excavated. But in and of itself, if Darwin would have known of the Tiktaalik and understood that the Tiktaalik was the very essence of what life kind of came from, or land life came from, when we look at ocean life to land, for instance, then he would have again jumped on that and would have stated this is the very essence of what all land mammal, or not mammals, all land life originated from. But anyways, that is besides the point. We're trying to talk about Darwin in his time and what he was trying to explain to the general public. So the first question is, because this was so revolutionary and because the people's common sense at the time didn't really agree with what Darwin was stating, right? Because it was very controversial at that time. So the question lies, how did Darwin expand his, or not just expand, but discuss his theory, and not just discuss his theory, but how did he start to convince the scientific community, and let alone the general public, of his hypothesis, of his theory. So one of the very things which I explained beforehand was based on pigeon farming in and of its, or not pigeon farming, but pigeon watching. My apologies. And through the Victorian practice of pigeon watching and having pigeons inside cages and slowly but surely seeing through the adaptations which happen within the offspring, how he was able to take, or not him, but how people were able to take certain offspring of that pigeon and create a plethora of other pigeons which weren't, quote unquote, within the natural world at that particular time, right? Because it's very hard for certain variations of pigeon to come together and to, quote unquote, reproduce a particular different, I wouldn't say different variant, but a subvariant of itself, right? That would have to go through a millennia almost in order for it to actually, okay, maybe not a millennia, but at least like 1,000 years or maybe even more in order to start seeing those types of adaptations within a particular species of pigeon, let's just say, or any type of species, and for that matter. And hence, Darwin looked at that and stated, okay, we now see that through artificial selection, we can quicken, right, the evolutionary process of pigeons, and let alone of dogs, right? Dogs originated from wolves. And from that time period and through the domestication of wolves, we were slowly but surely able to isolate a particular phenotype, not phenotype, my apologies, a particular trait that we ourselves wanted to have, or wanted that dog to have, and then accentuate that trait via mating that same animal, let's just, or not same animal, that wolf with another wolf of its ilk, kind of thing. And from there, we can slowly but surely see through the generation that we were able to create dogs of different sizes, different variants, different eye color, different. It was a plethora of ways that we were able to influence the wolf in a particular way that suited ourselves, in a sense. So when Darwin looked at the naturalistic perspective, or evolution through natural selection, he said, well, there's one thing, right? Because it's not humans going to every animal that's out there, that's out in the world, and mating them with each other and then letting them go into the wild, right? Or sometimes they do that. But I mean, besides that, he realized that, hey, wait a few seconds, it is nature, it is the environment that are choosing these traits, and the environment in and of itself which is causing, right, the plethora of life forms that we see out there today. And the beautiful thing is that also, which is much more accentuated today, is the idea of evolution through the actual extinction of other animals, right? Because those animals weren't able to adapt, so they died out. But if that animal or that species was still not able to adapt their said environment through because of a quick and drastic change, what ended up happening is that that entire species would die out, and there would be an extinction of that particular species. right? And that goes for a plethora of other species too. If the environment changes too quickly, it is much harder for a particular organism to adapt. And because it is harder for that particular organism to adapt, it will die. And the other organisms around it or within that general environment will also die as well. If they can adapt correctly or properly to that said environment. So Darwin he didn't necessarily have that idea as of yet, but he kind of understood based on seeing um, fossils, right? He understood that there were certain things that were there beforehand that aren't here now. And from that idea, he slowly but surely he slowly started to think of the extinctionary method that goes into evolution in and of itself, because it is much harder to reproduce when your numbers are dwindling extremely fast and when that species no longer exists because they've been extinct. But the other extreme that Darwin focused on was that he wanted to show people, right, how evolution through long durations of time and through generations actually worked, right? And sometimes it's extremely difficult, even if you use pigeons to kind of accentuate, right, natural selection on a larger scale, right? So what he did was that he used Malthus's way of arguing about food production and population surplus, right? So what Malthus thought was that when a particular species overpopulates, right, their general region or even quote unquote the world in a particular way, what ends up happening is that the food supply is not able to keep up with the population growth. And what ends up happening is that famines, disease, wars, and a plethora of other things, and obviously malnutrition hits the population hard. And that's what Malthus's theory was focusing on, was more like food and population, or population theory based on food decline, or not food decline, but food surplus, right? Now, the question was that Darwin utilized the Malthusian method in order to show how natural selection worked. So he stated, look, if you have an area, right, or an environment that is beneficial for a said organism, what ends up happening is that that organism adapts, right, to that said environment. And from adapting to that said environment, it's able to survive much longer. But he stated, but if an environment changes quickly, then what ends up happening to that organism is that it loses out. And through losing out, what ends up happening is that that entire species goes through a decline, right? But that doesn't mean that the species is going to go extinct. What that only means is that that species will decline, and if it is able to survive long enough within the changed environment, there is a particular hope that that species, that organism, will adapt to the environment, right? Because everything is based on the duration of time of how long a species or an organism lives within a set environment. If it doesn't live within that set environment for long enough, it will die. But if it lives in that set environment long enough that that generations have been born in the same environment, it will adapt to that set environment, and from there actually benefit from the environment that it adapted to. So that's how Darwin really focused and utilized Malthus's theory in order to benefit natural selection and how reproduction works and how survivability works when it comes to the adaptation of a particular environment. Not environment, sorry, of an organism to its environment. And from there, people started to grasp it. It made sense to people because they already understood Malthus's idea. And it makes sense, right? When you're looking at population growth and you see that the food surplus isn't enough for that said population, that population goes into decline. If the food surplus slowly starts to drop, let's just say, that means that there could be an extinction event for that particular species or for humanity as Malthus looked at it, right? But Malthus stated that because of the way that a population can rebound, right, by overpopulation, decline, and then once there is a balance, right, then the population would start to grow again and then decline. And that's what Malthus was thinking about. And let alone trying to warn the people that if too many people have children and everything like that, it will be it will burden the food surplus, or not food surplus, but the food supply that a nation or that a particular area had, and henceforth it will cause death, destruction, malnutrition, starvation, and so on and so forth. But what Darwin stated was that, look, I can use the same exact thing to explain my idea of natural selection to the general public in a way, and to scientists in a way that they can understand what I am trying to espouse. And from there, that was the greatest thing. So from pigeons, right, the pastime activity of the aristocrat, and let alone Malthus's idea, which was starting to circulate throughout the population and stuff like that of England at that particular time, or England of that at that particular time. What ended up happening was that these two ideas melded together and reformulated in a way to benefit natural selection, or his theory of natural selection helped build that theory, or help the general public and the scientific community understand Darwin's hypothesis and understand Darwin's theory in the first place. So that is very interesting when we truly delve into how Darwin helped and molded his theory to the general public and to the scientific community as a whole. So all in all, I wanted to have a longer show tonight, but at the same time, I think that right now we kind of went over the most pressing points to natural selection in and of itself, and how Darwin kind of looked at natural selection as a proper theory of how biological or organic organisms came to be, and how organisms have a plethora, or why we see a plethora of organisms here today. My apologies. Wow. Actually, before I actually end, there is one other thing that that Darwin looked at and William looked at. They both looked at the geographic circumstances of different environments, and what they started to see is that each environment had a particular species that looked like that original species or whatever. And let alone, if we look at mammals in a particular environment, they would relatively look the same in a particular way. However, if that animal was brought to a different environment and learned how to adapt to that said environment, it would look completely different. And that's why when you look at animals that are particularly in, let's just say, northern environments, or animals that are particularly in dry, arid environments, they really don't look the same in particular, right? Because of their environmental differences and everything like that. They are I want to say drastically different, but we can see differences within those two species in particular, right? And that's why is that the geographic difference also has a massive effect on the way that a organism adapts to its environment. So, all in all, I just wanted to say that. Thank you all for listening. I just want to state one more time. Thank you. I want to say thank you to our Patreons. I want to say thank you to Linear. I want to say thank you to Dion LaShay. And I want to say thank you to TART for really helping me do what I do, and that is relay videos for the viewers. And also, I really do want to thank everybody who's inside the comment section. I really do appreciate it. You're the reason why I'm doing this. And I hope that you all have a great week. And I will see you next weekend when we will be delving into natural selection after Darwin, right? And that's going to be something that is going to be very interesting because there's going to be much more to natural selection than just Darwin's own insight on the matter in and of itself. So it's going to be very exciting. So if you want to keep watching, or no, keep watching, but if you want to come on through and watch, that is going to be fantastic. So again, thank you so much, everybody, and I will see you next time on the Atheist Uprising. Remember to continue the uprising.